This morning, the sermon, I believe it's Sermon 6 from the book of Esther, and entitled Living in God's Timing. In 2012, Christmas of 2012, David Setner and his wife were returning to Florida from their vacation home in North Carolina. They spent Christmas there, and so I think it was maybe New Year's Day, actually 2013. They're flying home, and David had a habit of, as he approached his home, he would get below the flight patterns, get under the radar, and do a couple passes over his property, circle around the house, and just for fun. This time on January 1st of 2013. As he's flying over, they're approaching the landing strip, and he notices there's a truck in the driveway. A strange truck in the driveway, and there is a man walking around their house. Then he sees the man back his truck up to the utility trailer and proceed to hitch it and drive away. So he flew a little lower, and he just kept following this truck. Followed it down the I-75, and eventually the police were able to catch up and get the thief. What impeccable timing. It's unreal. You know, we might even conclude that's God's timing. I don't know if he's a believer. Doing the right thing at the right time matters. I wasn't here way early this morning. I wasn't here at 7 a.m., but if any of you were here at 7 a.m. to hold the door for the people coming, your timing's off. We would probably say that's stupid. That's what a weird thing to do. Holding the door for someone is only necessary when the person is coming. Timing is actually important when you're holding the door for someone. I've never intentionally closed it too early, but my guess is if you hold the door for someone and your timing is off, you'll likely upset someone. And if you show up an hour early, you're wasting your time. Timing matters. Timing matters in every part of life. How about in a baseball game? The player who cranks a home run understands well perfect timing. Perfect timing for swinging the bat. And a lot of us remember this moment. Joey Bats, October 14, 2015, 7th inning. Score is tied at 3. Game 5 in the ALDS championship game against the Rangers. And Bautista's timing is bang on as he sends a long ball into the bleachers. And he crushes it, and of course does the infamous bat flip, and the Blue Jays, it was a 3-run shot. The timing was perfect, not only in swinging the bat, but in leading the team to the next round. Timing matters. It matters as in life. As you wait for direction, it matters. And sometimes when we fail to act, when we fail to move, we miss the opportunities. And pardon me. I've noticed that in sports, one of the things that sets good hockey players apart from me is my timing's off. I can't do a one-timer shot. My timing's off. I miss them. But the other thing, where good hockey players, the window to pass the puck is a split second. It takes me too long, and I miss the opportunity. It's not a big deal at the level of hockey that I play. It's a big deal when I miss that opportunity in life. When I have the split second, I have but one, the moment passes in front of me, and I may even think, oh, I could encourage, and the moment is gone. This morning, I want to encourage us to live in God's timing and give us sort of 4 pointers of just as we live, to recognize, to move, to act accordingly, and in seizing the day. In fact, I thought maybe I should have called the sermon Carpe Diem. Seize the day. It's a Latin phrase frequently said. Seize the day. Teenagers, a few years ago at least, would say, YOLO. You only live once. And it's true. Usually they said that when they were doing something stupid. And so they say, let's go for it, let's be crazy. Well, the reality is you only live once on earth. You only get this chance. YOLO. And so don't miss the moment. Don't miss the opportunities that are passing before us. Let's seize today. Perhaps this morning even, as you fellowship after church, you may just find yourself in a conversation with someone who needs encouragement. Seize that. You might say, I don't know the words. I don't know what to say. I don't know what this means. In God's timing, he will move. For those of you who are born again, the Holy Spirit is inside of you. And so let's live on God's timeline. So living in God's timing. Because his timeline doesn't look like ours usually, it's easy to get frustrated and impatient with him when we think things should be happening, when we think that things should be different. Throughout history, that has been sort of the theme of following God, is Christians getting frustrated, followers getting frustrated, because when we think something should be happening, it's not. But even when he seems silent, this is the recurring theme in the book of Esther. The recurring theme is this: he is working behind the scenes for the good of his people. Providence, God's protective care, working behind the scenes for the good of his people. As we consider Esther this morning, going before the king with a request that may well cost her everything. And she goes in and waits for the right time. Sometimes we might be in a similar situation where we know that timing is important and it just works out. And we say, wow, that's amazing. Other times, God needs us to act and speak. And we need to determine the right time for that to happen. There are times we may want to tell someone something, but the time is not right. And so we wait. For Esther, this morning is a time for her to speak up. She has 60 million Jews depending on her. The Jewish nation has been already told. They've been informed. It's been posted. The messengers have gone throughout the provinces, 127 provinces, declaring that on the 13th day of Adar, the 12th month, the Jews are to be killed in one day, 60 million. This was to be a complete genocide, a complete annihilation of a people. And Esther learns of this and knows that there are few people who have the opportunity or the responsibility to do what she needs to do. And so from the 5th chapter this morning, we're going to draw a few lessons. Before we get into there, though, I'd like to just go to the end of chapter 4 and just to remind us what's happening. So the sermon series is entitled For Such a Time as This, and this comes from the end of the 4th chapter, where Mordecai tells Esther, look, of course you don't want to do this. Of course you don't want to go in and make this request of the king. But who knows? Perhaps you have come to this time, to this place, for such a time as this. And he also reminds her, he says, do not think that just because you live in the king's palace, you will escape. And Mordecai showed his faith in Yahweh, in Jehovah, in God. He showed his faith when he said, if you don't step up and do this, he will deliver us through someone else. But Esther, this is your time. Who knows but that you have come to this place for such a time as this? And then Esther replied. This is where at the end of chapter 4, verse 15. And Esther replies to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews in Susa, all those who you know, and tell them to pray for me, to fast on my behalf for the next 3 days. Don't eat anything. Don't drink anything. And I and my maids will fast as you do. And when this is done, I'm going to go before the king. And if I perish, I perish. If he takes my life, that's it. But I will know I did my part. Here's a question for us. Are you doing your part? Are you and I doing what God has called us to in this time? It is not an accident. You've heard me say this before. You are alive in this place, in this time, divinely. And she has this humility where she just says, this is it. If I perish, I perish. And so Mordecai went out and he did all as Esther had instructed for him to do. Pardon me. Now, there are 3 things that as we consider life's challenges, when we face life's challenges, what can we do as we approach something difficult? And if you haven't, you will. That is the reality. And I have 3 questions for us of self-reflection. The first one is this. What is my attitude? What is, as I approach the difficult situation, is my attitude right? It's easy perhaps for us to look around and say, yeah, well, he should be brought down a few notches, or yeah, they need a lesson. What is my attitude? Am I teachable? Am I humble? Esther coming to this place, initially saying, there is no way, and then hearing her cousin saying, Esther, this is your time. And her change in spirit as she says, if it costs me everything, I will do this. How about you? How about me? Do I have the right posture in order to talk to someone? If I feel that someone needs the word of encouragement, someone needs correction or exhortation, that's the scary one. We'll get there a little later. Someone needs this. Is my attitude right? And secondly, how do I approach it? So, what is my approach in order to win this? So Esther needs to ask this. So how do I approach the king so that I win his favor again? She hasn't been with him for like 30 days. And if you're not aware, this is the reality. The king is in his throne room, and if someone enters that room without being summoned, without being invited or called, the penalty is death, unless the king holds out his golden scepter and they come and they touch the end, and that indicates the king has chosen grace and favor. So if the king is not in a good mood, then this is the last day for Esther, because she broke the rule in entering his throne room. And she is thinking, how do I approach this? What is my approach as I come to the king? When you and I need to move towards a difficult situation, we need to prepare. It's not a matter of just showing up and bringing down the hammer. What is my approach? We, those of us who have been in church for any length of time, know that it is also the place where many hurts happen. Usually, I hope, unintentionally. And sometimes, though, we're not going to get into what is my approach. How do I approach this best so that we move forward in what is good and right and wholesome and a path of healing? What is my approach? And finally, had to go with another A. What's my angle? That might be similar to approach, but this is what I mean by this. Do I have the right facts? Do I actually know what's going on? And I think of this sometimes on occasion as a teacher, someone comes to me and says, hey, there's bullying going on. Let's pick on that one. It's just unacceptable. Absolutely. So I always tell the kids, if someone's getting bullied, you got to let a teacher know. You have to. You're not tattling. You are helping to stop it. And no one will ever know that you said something, because I'm not going to deal with it that day. Maybe the child has it in for this person. Maybe they dislike him. Maybe they just get pleasure out of seeing him get in trouble. Perhaps his angle is off. I want to know before I go to someone, before I meet with someone, I want to know that my facts are right, that my angle is right, that I am seeing it from all sides. And so that's important. Do I have it? Do I have it right? And so, is my attitude right? What is the best approach? And what's my angle? Am I coming to with the right spirit? Do I actually know what's going on? Perhaps we've all heard the tear-jerking stories, right? The child who's acting out and then learning later that something extremely painful is going on in their lives. And suddenly, it almost doesn't matter that they're acting out, because it's just an expression of something more painful going on inside of them. And it's so important that we know that we have a good angle on the situation. Let's get into this now. In the 5th chapter of Esther, Esther needs to consider these 3 things as she approaches the king. So throughout this chapter, I have four lessons on God's timing, 4 things for us to remember as we move into God's timing. Verse 1. So on the 3rd day, she had requested that the fasting happens for 3 days. And on the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room opposite the entrance of the palace. She did not just get out of bed that day and go put on a bathrobe, wrap her hair up in a banana clip, and decide, all right, let's do this. She prepared herself. Point 1, when it is time to pray and fast, do not think that it is accomplishing nothing. That's a long point. But when it is time to pray and fast, just because you are not the one doing does not mean God is not doing. I think one of the reasons why we struggle with prayer and fasting is because it's easy to feel like nothing's happening. That somehow God needs us to do the doing. He moves in mysterious ways. We know that. He moves behind the scenes. And our responsibility sometimes is to fast, and that's a hard thing to do. It is hard to spend time in prayer, to give up, and we can fast for many things. In fact, this is a side note, I realize that we're not Catholics, but the practice of Lent is a good practice, the 40 days before Good Friday, and that starts on Wednesday of this week. So Tuesday is Shrove Tuesday, pancakes for supper for everyone, and then, or Pancake Tuesday it's called, and Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, and in Catholic tradition it is the day of when the morning starts, as they consider the suffering of Jesus, and so many will fast from something throughout that time period. Not a bad discipline, even though it's not of our, not something that necessarily is of our tradition. When it's time, why is fasting so hard? It is a personal sacrifice. We know that God can do things without us, but He honors prayer and fasting. In these 3 days, God is giving, it's easy to say after 3 days, we might think Esther mustered up the courage. All right, I got to do this. This might be it. In these 3 days, I believe that God divinely gave her peace, gave her courage, and that comes from God. It's not just a matter of mustering up enough courage and just determination. Peace comes from Him. It's not something that is just of ourselves. When we pray, when we fast, don't think that it is not accomplishing anything. The second thing from verse 1 is her actions. On the third day, it was time, and she knew this is a time to act. And I'll come back to this again, but it's the second point. So the first one is there's a time to pray and fast. The second one is there is a time to act. When you face something difficult, when you know that, man, I'm going to have that tough conversation, there's a time to have the tough conversation. That's a simple, there's a time to act. And these conversations for us, dads, moms, if you have not, and I don't want to always come back to the same thing, but with our children, the digital age is an awesome age. Laura gave me a watch for my birthday, and I just love it. It does a lot of things. The digital age is amazing and has the power to devastate and destroy lives. Unlike, I don't know if there's ever been a time like this before. And parents, if we are not engaging with our children in their digital worlds, we are not acting when we should. And maybe to everyone, if we're not doing so well with our friends, there's a time to act. There's a time to do. So, time to fast and pray. And Esther did. She got up. She put on she prepared herself. She dresses up. She puts on her good garments. She puts on probably her good jewelry, and she wants to impress the king. And we know that, I remember a coach saying something like this: proper preparation prevents poor performance. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. And isn't that true in life? Athletes are preparing long before game time. I talked with a young athlete last night that headed out to his hockey game this morning. And they were going to arrive well before game time. Of course they do. They need to be there a couple hours early. They need to have their legs going. They need to be ready. Do we look at them and they have a sweat going and we might say, but the game hasn't even started. What are you doing? We are preparing. Esther prepared. If you are facing a challenging situation, and especially if it involves another person, it requires preparation. We don't just show up and say, well, I'm going to give it to you straight. The truth hurts. It does sometimes, but it doesn't have to come from you in a hurtful way. Peter, of all the guys he was pretty blunt at times. In his letter, he says this, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you of the reason of the hope that is in you. Chapter 3, verse 15. His last phrase gets me. And do it gently and meekly. An important point for us. She prepares. She probably has a sweat going before the game as well. And she positions herself. So here she comes into the king's palace in the front quarters, and she knows the king is in that room right there. She positions herself in a place so that the king sees her. She is not manipulating. She is taking control of every aspect that she can. She positioned herself. Sometimes we get stuck on saying, God, open doors for me and I'll go through them. And there are times when God wants us to take one step, put one foot in front of the other, and actually push on the door. She positioned herself. It makes me think of the Matthew West song, Do Something. He says, I'm looking around and I see all this, the painful things of children getting hurt and children being slaved into getting sold into slavery. And I get angry, he says, and I shake my fist at heaven and say, God, why don't you do something? And God says, I did. I made you. And that's a message for every one of us. That's a message for us. He placed us in our situations. All of us are in different situations, different places. You are the salt of the earth. The city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, and that's you. So here we are, preparing, positioning ourselves to move into where God has called us. Verse 2 says this, and here's Esther, positioned herself, and the king saw her. And the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, and she won favor in his sight. Pardon me. And he holds out the golden scepter, and Esther approaches. Now, this is just an amazing imagery. Esther approaches, and she reaches out and she touches the tip of the scepter. You see, this is what the world says. That's how you get your husband to do what you want. You dress up, you look good, and you put on all the things that will catch his eye, and you'll get whatever you're wanting. That's what the world says. God says this. Proverbs chapter 21, verses 1 and 2. The king's heart is a stream of water in the hands of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. Every way of the man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the heart. And so Esther is here. Here's an image that is quite awesome. She is likely terrified. She is approaching the king. There is another king, much bigger than Ahasuerus or Xerxes, whichever name. This king is also on a throne. This king is also governing. And this is the verse for us. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 15 and 16. We don't have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, because he was tempted in every way just like us. Here's the verse, 16. Let us then confidently draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in our time of need. What a difference. The Our king is holding out his scepter for us. He is holding it out. He is keeping it there. You and I are invited to run to that throne. You and I are invited to enter confidently. You and I are invited to set our shame down and to move into the presence of this king so that we can find mercy and grace in time of need. What do you need today? What is it that you need? Is it mercy? Is it grace? Is it favor? Is it forgiveness? Is it wisdom? Is it patience? That's what the king is offering readily. And he wants you to come. What a difference. For Esther, she didn't know if she's going to get decapitated that day or driven through with a stake. For us, we are invited by the king. Let's go on. Verse 3 then, he says to Esther, he says, what is your request? Queen Esther, what do you want? In fact, I will give it to you without even knowing what it is, up to half the kingdom. Now this is a massive kingdom, and he's saying, I will give it to you. I'll grant your request. And Esther says, verse 4, Esther says, if it please the king, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I've prepared for the king. Okay, this is her husband. And why is she delaying? Could she not have said, King Ahasuerus, dear, I need a private word with you. Can Haman leave? King, he's wanting to kill me. Could she not have? Instead, she says, I'd like to have a feast. I'd like to have a feast prepared, and you and Haman to come. Well, she's been preparing. When it's time to act, we go boldly, we go confidently. This is much more complicated than simply saying, hey, can you change the law? When a law was made, it was not easily changed. We know that, and we also know that this law has already gone throughout the entire empire a long time before. The word is out. And so this did not only affect Esther, but all the Jews throughout the Medish or Persian Empire. And so she is, like I heard one speaker say, so Esther here, she's approaching the king and she's saying, okay, how do I do this? How do I get my husband to hear me? How do I really get his attention? How do I get his favor? How do I tread softly? I need to handle this well. How do I do? I know, food. Not much has changed. Here's another reality. The King of Kings wants to dine with us. Jesus says, if anyone opens their heart, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone opens it, I will come in and dine with him. Jesus wants to dine with you. Have you gone on a date with him? How about just when you go for lunch, go by yourself and you can eat and intentionally spend time with Jesus. There's a time to act, and when it is that time, go boldly, confidently, but wisely. And that's what she is doing. She knows that this is a big law. It affects a lot of people. And so she says, come to the feast. Verses 5 and 6. So the king said, well, bring Haman quickly so that we may do as Esther has asked. So the king and Haman come to the feast that Esther has prepared. And when they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther again, so what is your wish? What do you want? I will grant it to you, up to half of the kingdom. Esther, she delays a second time, and I don't really know why. Maybe the time didn't feel right. Maybe she's just, it's just not quite right. Have you ever been in a situation like that where you were planning to talk with someone about something, or you were planning to confess something, or you were wanting to have this, and suddenly you just know this isn't right. It's just not the right time. There is a time, the third point that I have. So the first one, pray and fast. Second one, time to act. The third one is there's a time to be patient. There's a time where we need to say, we need to be patient. So here, the feast is prepared, and it reminds me of another feast when we have communion and we meet with the King, so to speak, and we break bread together. We are reminded not only of Jesus' sacrifice, we are reminded of God's favor on us, of his love for us. And in verse 7, she answers. He says, what's your wish? And Esther says, my request is, if I found favor in the sight of the king, if it pleases the king to grant me my wish, come to another feast that I've prepared for you for tomorrow, and then I will do as the king has said. Perhaps it's not the right time. And there are times when we talk and we shouldn't. It wasn't the right time. I remember a long time ago, I had a student that was going through something really, really hard. I was at the parent-teacher evening interview, and her mom overstayed the length of the interview. And this child was facing things that no child should ever face. And if I have students in the room here, it's long before you came to school. And as that mom left, I remember hearing someone scolding her. Someone scolding her for overstaying, for taking someone else's time. And she probably shouldn't have. That's really me. It's up to me to end the interview, right? That guy was clueless. He had no idea what's going on. Sometimes we talk, and that's not the right time. We have to be patient. When the Spirit says, no, you got to back off, honor it. You might say, no, but I have prepared for this. This is now my time. I need to talk with this person. And the Spirit says, back off. You back off. When God wants to move, we need his power. There's another thing we need. We need his permission. I believe it. When we move without his permission, we are going ahead of his plan. Think about, did Jesus heal everyone? Did Jesus heal everyone that he met when he was on earth? No. Outside of the temple in Jerusalem, there was a man, we see this in Acts chapter 3, he was crippled, he was unable to walk, and he was there, it says, for 40 years. That's a long time. And it was Peter and John who came to this man. Was he not there? Did Jesus not see him when he was ministering? Of course he did. But Jesus didn't heal him. Peter and John were given the opportunity then to be used by God, and it would maximize. In fact, after that happened, Peter and John said, were used by God. 3,000 people joined the church. That wouldn't have happened if Jesus had healed him, likely. God's timeline is different than ours, and he wants his glory to be maximized. He wants to complete his plan in his time, living in God's timing. When it's time to be patient, know that God is still working behind the scenes, but you and we are natured to be doing, and we know that, and when we look back, we always say hindsight's 20/20. when we look back and we say, oh, I see what God is doing. Let's go on to the second scene here. So Esther says, I want you to come to the feast tomorrow. Now we switch scenes. And Haman, he heads out of there, and he is glad. He is feeling good. It says he's joyful, he's glad of heart. Let's read through this. But when Haman saw, and as he's going out, he's just feeling great. And then he sees Mordecai sitting at the king's gate, and he hates Mordecai. Sees Mordecai sitting there, and that he neither rose nor trembled before him. He was filled with wrath against Mordecai. Nevertheless, he restrained himself. He went home, and he had some of his friends over, and his wife Zeresh. And Haman starts talking to them about himself. He tells them about all his wealth, his splendor of his riches. He talks about the number of sons. In fact, we read later in the book of Esther that Haman has 10 sons. He is a prominent man. He's talking about the number of his sons and all the promotions that the king is giving him. He's just, talking about himself. And then he says, in fact, I'm being invited to dinners with only the king and the queen. That's where I've gotten to. That's who I am. Haman tells them, verse 12, even the officials and even Queen Esther lets no one come to the king at the feast that she has prepared, and tomorrow I am invited by her together with the king. Guys, look at me. It's been said that we can measure sometimes a person's character by what bugs him. Mordecai doesn't just bug Haman, he hates Mordecai. And as he's leaving, he sees this, and he's like, man, it ticks me off. What bugs you? There are so many little things that bug me, it's embarrassing. This one will make you laugh. I like to try to have a clean driveway. In fact, I told my neighbor that I vacuum it once in a while just so that they think I'm crazy. I don't actually vacuum it. I like to have a clean driveway just so they think I'm crazy and keep their distance a little bit. No. But I shovel snow. I have shoveled snow this year like it is ridiculous, but it's down to the concrete. And what bugs me? Then the kids walk to school. I have the biggest snowbanks because I shovel some more snow than anyone else. And do you know what they got to do? Go up over the snow, and they push it back down. It ticks me off. Hope my neighbors aren't listening. What a little thing. I get told by people in my house and in my life that I need to get over things. Go on the sidewalk. I shoveled that as well. It's clean for you. Come on. What bugs you? It's been said that we can measure a man's character by what bugs him. I'm not the only one. Maybe I'm the only one but what about our lawns dads? You get it all groomed, and then some kid with his bike starts to, I do like the kids, with his BMX, again, needs to jump the curb, and then what happens? Across that freshly groomed lawn, and he leaves tracks all over the place. There's streets and sidewalks and skate parks for... Okay, what bugs you? You have your things too. Dirty shoes and clean vehicles. Boy, I'm just going down my list. We all have these things. Haman hates Mordecai. I need to wrap this up. Don't let the little things spoil the beauty of today or what God is doing. So if someone took your seat in church this morning, get over it. Some of us needed to sit somewhere else, I noticed. Okay. I am kidding. But don't let the little things spoil the big picture. That kid on the BMX bike. maybe I should just start chatting with him. If he's coming across the lawn, it's a good opportunity for me to start a relationship. Stay off my lawn. Don't let the things that bug you rob you of what God is doing. Let's get to what's happening here. And when it is time to ignore the enemy, now this the fourth point here is this. So there's a time to fast and pray. There's a time to act. There's a time to be patient. Number 4, there is a time to ignore the enemy's words and ways. Yelling at the neighbor children or whoever it is, it's the wrong thing. That's from the enemy. Don't let the words of the enemy reside in your heart or mind. When it's time to ignore the enemy, stand firm in the Lord. The devil and the kingdom of darkness are in opposition to the kingdom of God. 100%. Verse 13 reveals Haman's heart, where he says, you see all my stuff. I am invited to the king. But there's this one thing that just ticks me off. There's still Mordecai out there. Haman has it made in a lot of ways. And he says, none of this matters. It is of nothing to me as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. And so Zeresh, his wife, has this plan. She says, well, and the friends, they say, well, let's build a gallows and kill him. He's a Jew. And Haman says, that's a good idea. Now let's understand something. In the Persian Empire, we think of gallows as being used to hang, and it's not really a big deal except this is barbaric. It's far less merciful than a hanging. It was a stake. Can you imagine what the neighbors must have been thinking of him, though? He built a stake, a pole, 75 feet high. That's how tall this is. What does it say here? 50 cubits. That's 75 feet. The neighbors, what is neighbor Haman doing? This is correct. New flagpole, maybe. And then they would impale the person. They would impale the person lengthwise on this stake. That was their means. The gallows, that's what it means. It is barbaric. That's what and this idea pleased Haman, and so he had the gallows made. Friends, in what time, when the enemy is speaking, block it out. When you recognize it is from darkness, for Haman here, when you recognize that it is bad advice, when you recognize that it is the enemy's words and ways, block them out, and they enter your mind and mine. They do. Where I get discouraged and I start listening to these discouraging voices, and the things that bug me are entering, and it robs me of where I need to live. So what time is it for you? Are you in a time of waiting? Are you being called to act, to be patient? Are you in a place where it's time to ignore the enemy, to stand in God alone? The psalmist writes this, the name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run into it and they are safe. Wherever you are, God is not done. He is working. Trust Him. The Holy Spirit is at work. Living in God's timing. There is a time to pray and fast, where we need to be quiet, where we need to invest. There is a time to act, to move, even if we don't know the way. And there is a time to be patient. There's a time for us in our waiting. God says this, they that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. In Psalm 14, he simply says, wait on the Lord. I say, wait. There is a time to be patient. There is a time to ignore the enemy's words and ways. Block out what is not from God. Block out those words. Block out those voices. And he will lead you as you live in his timeline, in his timing. God bless you all.